Welcome to another episode of 5-Minute Theology. Today we're going to be talking about the doctrine of sin, everybody's favorite doctrine. Sin is something that you don't really need the Bible to know that it exists. All you need are eyes and ears. It's all around us. In fact, I think most people today would acknowledge that our world is very sinful. I don't know if they've used those terms, but I think most people today would acknowledge that the world is not as they would wish that it would be. But we do need the Bible to know at least two things. One, to see our own sin. It's very easy to see the world's sin or other people's sin, but we very rarely see the sin in our own heart without divine assistance. Number two, just to know how sinful we are. If you ask people today, are people generally good? I don't know what you'd find, but I think you would be surprised how many people would say yes, we are, or people are generally good at their core. Here's the best place to start. We are not basically good. We're sinners. To be a sinner is to be an evil thing. Romans chapter 3, verse 10 through 11 says, "None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God." That's pretty upfront. Ephesians chapter 2, 3, Paul says that we are by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. John chapter 8, verse 34, Jesus says we are slaves to sin without Jesus. And in Colossians chapter 2, verse 13, Paul says we are dead in our trespasses. So sin isn't just something we do. It's not just an action. It's a state of moral bondage. It's imprisonment. We're slaves. We're dead. We're children of wrath. The Bible doesn't paint a very good picture of what it means to be a sinner. Because of Adam's sin in the garden, because of something we refer to as original sin, we have inherited corruption. We're corrupted in our bones. As David says in Psalm 51, we came from our mother's womb. We were sinful. We have guilt. We have condemnation. This is why we need Jesus to justify us before a holy God. This is why we need Jesus to take the punishment for our sin on the cross. This is why we need to be born again by the Spirit. This is why we need to be raised from our deadness. This is why we need to be changed. So if I had to define sin, instead of just coming up with my own words, I think I would point to Scripture. So look at Hebrews chapter 3, verse 15 through 19, and it gives us all the descriptors we need. He's talking about Israel in the wilderness. Verse 15, "As it is said, today if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion." Verse 16, "For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt, led by Moses? And with whom was He provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did He swear that they would not enter the rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief." So there you go. You got 4 synonyms for sin right there in 5 verses in the book of Hebrews, right there using the Old Testament. So sin is hardness of heart, rebellion against God, disobedience to God, and unbelief. So sin isn't just a mistake. Parents, please don't teach your kids that sin is only missing the mark and that it's just falling short. Yes, the Hebrew word for sin denotes missing the mark, and yes, all have fallen short of the glory of God, Romans chapter 3, verse 23. But the Bible also uses many words to convey just how evil sin is and how evil we are and how much we need Jesus. This is why God gave us the law, so that we would know our sin, that we would know our inability to do good and to please Him, and that we would know our need for Jesus who actually kept the law. John Piper says that sin is preferring anything more than God, which I think is an excellent definition. I think that's a good definition because that's precisely what happened in the garden. Adam and Eve, it was more important for them to do what they wanted, or the fruit was more important to them in that moment, being deceived, than it was about obeying their Creator. Ultimately, I would equate sin with idolatry. When you sin, you're worshiping something other than God. And when you hear that, you might think to yourself, well, Avi, I don't worship idols, I'm a Christian. But think about this. All sin is rooted in worship of self, and that's why we need the Spirit to sanctify us and to conform us to the image of Jesus, and for us to find our ultimate satisfaction and joy in Jesus and not in things or in people. If we get sin wrong, we get everything else wrong. We get the atonement wrong. We get the rebirth wrong. We get the sanctification wrong. We get the church wrong. But if we have an understanding of the depths of our sin, we can also have an understanding of the depths of God's grace to save us from our sin. Thank you for joining us for another episode of 5 Minute Theology. I hope you now have a greater understanding of the doctrine of sin.